Thank you. I just need a moment to get this hooked up. Okay, hello brethren. Thank you so much for inviting me here. This is a really great honor and a really cool thing you have going on here. So I'm just excited to be a part of it and just come share with you some of what I'm interested in researching. I usually write I usually write a paper and give a paper at things like this, but this time I decided to not actually write out a full paper, but rather to just bring my notes and kind of just some stuff I'm working on to just kind of explore this topic of the two pillars. So it's a little bit more like a jam session than a paper. So let's just get right into it. So this topic of the two pillars, I do want to think about it in a certain way. And so I have a kind of thematic way I want to start thinking about what the two pillars are and what they can represent for a Mason. So this is a book that I've been checking out recently. It's an older book from the mid-20th century that deals with some interesting themes around religion and ritual. It's by a scholar of religion some of you may have heard of, Jedediah. He was a really prominent scholar of the 20th century at the University of Chicago. This is one of his first books, and it's called The Myth of the Eternal Return, is what it was translated into. So I'm just going to read, I have a lot of quotes from a lot of different sources that I'm going to read tonight. So you'll be hearing a lot of me reading. So I'm going to read a passage from this book, what he says. It's up here on the slide. The chief difference between the man of the archaic and traditional societies and the man of the modern societies, with their strong imprint of Judeo-Christianity, lies in the fact that the former feels himself indissolubly connected with the cosmos and the cosmic rhythms, whereas the latter insists that he is connected only with history. He puts a capital H there. Of course, for the man of the archaic societies, the cosmos too has a history, if only because it is the creation of the gods and is held to have been organized by supernatural beings or mythical heroes. But this history of the cosmos and of human society is a sacred history, preserved and transmitted through myths. More than that, it is a history that can be repeated indefinitely, in the sense that the myths serve as models for ceremonies that periodically re-actualize the tremendous events that occurred at the beginning of time. What he means by that is to attach a mythology to a ritual and then reenact it over and over again is a way to, particularly a creation ritual we could say, is a way to bring that whole narrative to life again for the person who's undergoing the ritual. And so he's looking at a lot of different religious groups, and what he calls sort of archaic man is just like tribal, indigenous communities, stuff like that. But I think this relates to Freemasonry because we clearly have a series of rituals that culminate in the kind of mythological transmission that is attached to the candidate after the third degree. He suddenly re-actualizes the legitimacy of this thing, this narrative that he learned in the third degree by going through the ritual. So it's very interesting to me that the pillars kind of are this moment of entering into the temple, which is the only place where this can happen, where this mythology can be re-actualized and recreated again and again, is within the temple. So Eliade calls this in illo tempore, meaning the eternal now. Maybe you've heard of this idea of mythical time, whereas myths kind of are always existing, they're not a linear history. So this is just a couple quotes here from Eliade's book. So, recreation of the essence of the universe as a theophany. So when you come into the lodge and you experience the myth, it's a recreation of a sacred universe. It's a different universe is the idea that I'm trying to get across here. You're entering into a different universe. It's a regeneration of the beginning. The ritual repeats the creative act. So every time a person is initiated, in a sense that I'm talking about here, they recreate the story of the myth. They begin it again. And this whole concept that Eliade was looking at, he calls eternal return. Cyclical recurrence of what has gone before, repetition of archetypal gesture projected upon all planes. Ritual projects candidate back into the mythical past. So this is the important part. So when you get initiated in this way, and this mythology is attached to you, you're then transported into the past when this myth supposedly happened. I guess it's kind of quite literal in Freemasonry, actually, that we do this. And the myths around the two pillars are quite interesting, which is what I'm going to go into pretty soon here. But before I do that, there's a story Eliade talks about in this book about, and again, this is like 50, 60 years old, so I didn't like follow up on where he's getting his information. He's sort of drawing on older sources, but it's still interesting what he says. He says that in India, when they want to mark out a temple, they have their astrologers come and tell them where on the ground, according to the stars, the head of the serpent is that holds up the world. And the astrologer goes and finds and says the head is right over here. And so then they have the masons go out there and hit a peg into the ground right where the head of the serpent is. And this is to sort of, the idea is that it goes through the head of the serpent and locks the serpent in place right there. And that this ritualistically is like symbolic of Indra slaying the serpent, or you could think Michael slaying the dragon. But they go out there and they pin this snake head into the ground, and then they put a cornerstone on it. And then they construct the temple on top of this whole thing. And so the serpent is representative of chaos, and so by taking chaos, the serpent, and pinning it to the ground, and then building this edifice on it, it's this idea of creation anew. They're not just building a building, they're actually having a divine act of creation that recapitulates what the God's version of creation. So this is a diagram here of, just in generally speaking, a Hindu temple. The ground floor of it has the different names of different gods in different quadrants. And if you look at this picture, it sort of shows Brahma, the man god, sort of crouched down, and all these different names of deities are pinning God to the material world with the temple itself. And that all begins with the peg through the Indra's head. So this is a quote from, maybe some people have heard of this. I'm on a science fiction kick lately, so Philip K. Dick is one of my favorite science fiction authors, and he definitely turned his whole life into a myth. Like, some people say he went crazy, but he definitely lived his mythology. And so this is a quote from Eric Davis. Eric Davis is talking about Philip K. Dick. He says, "If this all sounds a bit like Eliade, it should. On the previous exegesis page," exegesis is Philip K. Dick's journal, Dick cites Eliade's notion that a mythological event unfolds ilo tempore, that's what I was just mentioning, this idea of eternal now, in another kind of time. And this is Dick, where he says, "Therefore, if you can get yourself into a mythological narrative, you will enter this dream time." So there's this idea here that if you could get initiated into one of these mythological rituals, you get to step out of normal time into this mythic time. So this is a lodge in Germany where you can see the pillars set up here, entering into the temple. That whole backstory there, what I wanted to bring up is that the pillars are the way you get into the temple. Like when you're watching a second degree and the pillars are used in that degree, every time I watch that I could really see that it's this symbolic moment of someone coming into the temple. Like when I was initiated in Arizona, they don't have the pillars just hanging out all the time. They only get put in that arrangement during second degree. The rest of the time they're kind of hidden or they're somewhere else. And so in these pillars you can see the two Hebrew characters on the pillars. So before I continue, there's just a few more examples I want to run through here. So one of them is another story from Hinduism of Narasimha. Narasimha is the god Vishnu who takes on a demonic form to slay another demon, basically. And I won't go through the whole story, but in this particular myth, the demon comes out of this, busts out of this pillar and it's the god in the form of the demon, busts out of this pillar to kill this other demon that could not be killed by it could only be killed in a certain way, couldn't be killed with any tools or weapons or anything. So Vishnu takes this form so that this lion form, so that it can kill the guy with his bare claws. It's like the only way you can get to it. So this notion that I'm going to get to later, the esotericists talk about this, that I'm going to get to at the end, hopefully, that the pillars represent certain stages of the initiatic journey. One stage is like facing the demons, right? Somehow one of these pillars brings you into the world of your own demonic or like shadow parts that need to be purified or at least faced. Another story here from the Bible is the story of Samson and the two pillars. So Samson is chained in the house of Dagon by the Philistines, and they're sort of leaving him there to die. Some of you might know the story. And he curses, he curses their God, and then they chain him up, and then he prays to Yahweh, and he says to Yahweh, O Lord, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me. I pray thee only this once, O God, that I may be once avenged of the Philistines from my own two eyes. And so, what he does is he breaks the two pillars and kills all of the Philistines in this temple of Dagon, all the priests. And it's just a dramatic artistic recreation of this particular story. And this idea of breaking pillars is also interesting, which I'm going to come back to. So there's entering into the pillars, and then there's destroying the pillars. Both of these themes you find in Freemasonry. But I'm going to kind of just keep moving along here. So another place you find this pillar symbolism, we're sort of looked at the ancient world now. Here's the kind of, well, this is stories from the ancient world, but these depictions are sort of really modern recreations of this idea of the pillars of Hercules. So Hercules supposedly set up these two pillars. In the story of Atlantis, in the story of Plato's account of Atlantis, he says that Hercules put up these two pillars to say, like, beyond it was where Atlantis would be, or the realm of the unknown. And then the Renaissance tradition says the pillars bore the warning me plus ultra, meaning that there is nothing further beyond these 2 points. And so this is like the Rock of Gibraltar, supposedly might be one of them, and then I can't remember what the other one has, some other name in the area. This is a picture of the Rock of Gibraltar. So with these 2 pillars, again, it's entering into the temple, it's entering into where there's a demon in the pillar, there is destructive forces, but there's also this idea that of the unknown. Pillars, particularly as they start to get used more and more, symbolize this me plus ultra, that whatever is beyond these pillars, we don't know. It's entering into the unknown, in other words. So Francis Bacon made great use of this on 2 of his frontispieces here, symbolizing the 2 pillars of Hercules. The one here on my left is Natural History in 10 Centuries. It shows 2 fluted columns with decorated capitals between which a globe lettered Mundus Intellectualis. In the background, the sea, above the sun rays, 2 cherubim, tetragrammaton, and the Latin from the Bible, that God saw the light and it was good. So Francis Bacon, as some of you may know, was sort of depicting here going between the 2 pillars is entering into the unknown. And he meant this not necessarily in a literal way, he meant this in the mind. So like this next version here from the Great Saturation, or sometimes called the Great Renewal, the Latin motto means, many will pass through and knowledge will be the greater. And here's just from the preface of this book what he says, that the state of knowledge is not prosperous nor greatly advancing, and that a way must be opened for the human understanding entirely different from any hitherto known, and other helps provided, in order that the mind may exercise over the nature of things the authority which properly belongs to it. So he was saying, this is the birth of science in some sense, the modern science as we know it, that the mind is going to enter into the unknown through this gateway of the pillars to kind of boldly go and experience what cannot be experienced on this side of the pillars. Here's another example where you start to find the more Masonic versions of this, where it's on one side you have the terrestrial earth, right? Now the other you have the starry heavens, or basically the zodiacs. And then what Freemasonry tells you, and what it says about the symbols of the 2 pillars, is that they're the pillars of King Solomon's temple. And so these are the 2 names for the pillars. And this is an illustration of them set up in the Geneva Bible. In the 4th degree, you find this symbolism of the pillars being crossed. So 2nd degree, candidate enters between the 2 pillars into the temple. In the 4th degree, in the Scottish Rite, this symbol is these 2 pillars being crossed. When I was in Arizona, I had a mentor who was a French Mason, and what he said this meant is once someone goes into the temple and you sort of enter this dream time, there's no going back. In the 4th degree, the symbol of the pillar sort of falling behind the initiate. This is the idea that once you go in, you can't actually get back out again, even if you wanted to. This is just his own interpretation, but I think it's kind of interesting. So now moving on to Masonic, more Masonic history and narratives about these two pillars. There's the one story about pillars of King Solomon's temple, but there's another line I wanted to follow. And where you find this in Masonry is in the Cook. You find it in the Constitution, but you find it in the Cook manuscript also. So the Cook manuscript is the oldest manuscript next to the Regis poem. It was published in 1861 by Matthew Cook, hence the name. And these are one of the old charges that Anderson uses when he writes his constitutions. So I'm going to read some quotes from a few things. Now here's what is in the Cook manuscript. And these three brethren knew that God would take vengeance for sin either by fire or water, and they were much concerned how to save the sciences they had discovered. And they took counsel together and exercised all their wits. And they said there were two kinds of stone of such virtue that one would not burn, called marble, and the other, named Lazarus, would not sink in water. And so they devised to write all the sciences they had found on these two stones, so that if God took vengeance by fire, the marble would not burn, and if by water, the other would not drown. And they besought their elder brother Jabal to make two pillars of these stones, that is of marble and of Lazarus, and to write on the two pillars all the sciences and crafts which they had found, and he did so. And therefore we may say that he was the wisest in science, for he first began and carried out their purpose before Noah's flood. Fortunately, knowing of the vengeance that God would send, the brethren knew not whether it would be by fire or water. They knew one of the two, is what it's saying. They knew by sort of prophecy he would send one or the other, and so they wrote their sciences on these two pillars of stone. Some men say that they wrote on the stones all the 7 sciences. So later on in his Cook manuscript, it says that either the names 2 people that might have found these, either the Greek mathematician Pythagoras or the philosopher Hermes, is the one who finds these pillars after the flood. I think I'll skip this one. This is Josephus' version of this. Is basically the same. You find accounts of this idea of the pillars being recording this scientific knowledge, technical knowledge, and surviving through the flood. In various places. Josephus has another pretty prominent one. But it says essentially the same thing that I just read to you before. A couple other places in Manetho, he's quoted in Eusebius. He talks about the pillars of Hermes in Egypt. So they're also finding them called different things, like pillars of Hermes, pillars of Jabal sometimes, pillars of Seth. So then on the bottom here, this is the one I will read. This is from Anderson's Constitution. So Anderson is incorporating this story from the Cook manuscript into his constitutions in 1723. And this is what he says. For by some vestiges of antiquity, we find one of them, godly Enoch, who died not, but was translated alive to heaven, prophesying of the final conflagration of the day of judgment, as St. Jude tells us, and likewise of the general deluge for the punishment of the world, upon which he erected his 2 large pillars, though some ascribe them to Seth, the one of stone and the other of brick, whereon were engraved the little sciences, etc. And that the stone pillar remained in Syria until the days of Vespasian the emperor. So the idea I'm trying to get across here is that entering the temple, first of all, enters you into mythical space. Because all these stories about the pillars that I'm talking about are sort of mythology that these were recorded by various ancient historians, by craftsmen. And that when you enter into the Masonic world, you're sort of being brought into this mythology that forms a part of it. And I take that to mean, because here you see these 2 pillars start to show up very prominent in Masonry, but you start to find them in other traditions that are somehow loosely attached to Freemasonry, esoteric traditions. So this 2-pillar symbolism, you can find it in a variety of places. And so like in the second tarot card that we see here, the High Priestess, you see the same imagery. This is coming from the Golden Dawn. And they kind of mean the same thing here, that by entering through these 2 pillars, you're entering into the unknown. In other words, the temple of initiation. So we will now turn to some of these more esoteric traditions, as long as I check my time real quick. Okay. All right, so my question was, all right, so Masonry has kind of 2 ways to look at these pillars. One is these stories about antediluvian knowledge coming through on these pillars. The other is the pillars themselves in front of King Solomon's temple. And you can find some people talking about this wood, or like materials from the original pillars were then used to build the Solomon's pillars, were part of Noah's Ark maybe, and were then used as the cross for Jesus. You can find that these funny little threads trying to connect up all of these material, this actual material of the thing. But it still doesn't quite get into where the esotericists and the occultists start talking about this. So here's two books that I want to talk about next, and one of them just came out recently. It's called Egregores. You've heard of this, and he's a marked stage as a Mason. He's sort of writing about occult traditions, but also Masonry and this concept of the egregore, which is kind of like a collective non-physical being that is attached to the lodge as in a kind of symbolic way. What he says, though, this is what started me on this, he says the word egregore is the Greek for watcher. And so I said, that's interesting, and I even emailed him and said, what is the Aramaic? And he didn't respond about that. He responded, but I thought, okay, maybe he doesn't know that. So I thought, well, how the hell is this? I know a little bit about this tradition of the Watchers, which I'm going to talk about. How does this get into Masonry? So this other book I got here is written by an evangelical Christian who is also writing a lot about this Book of Enoch, and there's this myth of the Watchers. So I kind of been pulling from both sources here because I find I can, when I'm researching, I like to work both angles of a certain subject, people approaching it from kind of polar points of view sometimes. In this sense, Mark is sort of talking about how we're using this as Masons or occult groups, and Michael Heiser is talking about how Jesus was sent to sort of stop that from happening. But I found this book too, and this is actually a tradition of witchcraft that links itself also to these two pillars in England, and they call them the pillars of Tubal-Cain. This image right here, I just thought was so outrageous that I have to just show it to all of you because, oh my God, I don't know what the hell it is, but you can look at it. One thing I found super interesting is that at the top they use the word Cain, but they spell it Q-A-Y-I-N. So this Tubal-Cain figure shows up in Masonry also. But this book recounts this sort of maybe like family preserved lineage coven thing in Britain that called themselves the Clan of Tubal-Cain. And their myth is about these, their mythology that you get initiated into is about these pillars, but it's also about these watchers. So I thought, okay, so one of the ways these esotericists are using this pillar symbology is not just about Solomon's temple, although you find some of that too, but they're somehow linking the pillars to this idea of knowledge, forbidden knowledge that was supposed to be destroyed in the flood, being preserved through the flood, and then being able to be accessed after the flood. And how would you access it? Well, you would go between two pillars, and you would get initiated, and you would hear mythology that would be attached to you in that process. This is kind of the idea. So this is from that book I just showed you, the Pillars of Tubal-Cain. It says, in Masonic lore, the twin Solomonic pillars are naturally associated with the famous Antediluvian pillars that are known variously as the Pillars of Seth, Pillars of Enoch, the Pillars of Noah, the Pillars of Jabal, or the Pillars of Tubal-Cain, depending upon which version of the origin is related. They are obviously not originals, but copies made by Hiram Biff on the orders of his royal employer. Today, these pillars are to be found in every Masonic lodge. Through such magical orders as the 19th century Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded by high-degree Freemasons and Neo-Rosicrucians, some modern ceremonial magicians have adopted the two pillars as suitable temple accessories. Okay, and they're doing this through these watchers. So what Mark Sage is calling egregores that are watching, I don't know, watching is the right word, but just sort of inhabiting and living with the members of a lodge or a group, this witchcraft order group in particular, but also you find this, what I found is you find this in the other esoteric groups as well. They also work with this idea that they're getting knowledge from the angels, is what it boils down to. So here's just a little interesting background about this. So an ancient Judaic angelology was influenced by the Egyptian Orshu. So now we're not tracking this word watchers. Egypt supposedly there is the group called the Urshu, who are also the Watchers, also who are called the followers of Seth. This is coming from E.A. Wallace Budge. This is a pretty antiquated reference, but it's still kind of interesting. You also find these pillars in the Babylonian and Persian Zoroastrianism, but mainly it's coming from the ancient Mesopotamian Sumerian tradition of the Apkallu. So the Apkallu were 7 mythological sages who lived before the flood, received the primeval traditions from the gods, and then carried it through the flood to be taken up by what is referred to as the Umanu, or the royal craftsmen, who are the tradition of the post-Diluvian scholars, those who had mastered certain bodies of technical knowledge. So in this ancient Babylonian tradition, there is this idea that before the flood, the scholars had somehow gotten with the angels and the gods and gotten this technical knowledge. This is really science is what we're talking about. And they had preserved it through the flood, and then afterwards, the royal craftsmen, as they say, got access to this knowledge. I don't think that's actually true. If you look at what was really going on, it was mostly just the scholars always had it. Like in this world, the scholars were kind of the initiates, and they were the ones who knew, and they knew directly from the gods and from their lineage. I don't know how much the craftsmen knew, but you do, with people who are actually building things, yes, some of this knowledge does trickle down to them. So here's a quote from a book called Secrecy of the Gods. This is archaeologists and historians working on this. It says, given to the Antediluvian sages names resembling titles of scientific treatises serve the purpose of establishing the explicit connection between contemporary and primeval scholarship. As the Mesopotamian connection of knowledge was preeminently associated with pragmatic kinds of it, the term wisdom denotes the realms of technologies and handicraft skills as well. In some royal inscriptions of first millennium Mesopotamia, references occur to royal craftsmen, these are the Umanu, who, quote, knew the secret. Such capable craftsmen as the carpenter Ninildu, the lapidary Nizandim, and the metalworker Ninagal, stonecutter Nkuru, and the goldsmith Kusabanda were the patron deities of smiths, manifestations of the god Ea, and also identified with the antediluvian Apkallu. So you've probably seen these pictures of what the Apkallu might look like. And the Apkallu are these divine sages before the flood, which you see on the top, these fish things. You find these fish symbolism everywhere because it's related to this flood thing, which I'll talk about in a second. And on the bottom, this is a reputation of these Umanu, the royal craftsmen, somehow getting this knowledge after the flood. So here's what Heiser says about this, because Heiser, his book is an evangelical book. So he's trying to connect all these esoteric traditions with this watcher thing that Jesus came to stop in his reading. It is no understatement that for Mesopotamians, the entire repository of knowledge that was to prove indispensable for civilization was traced back to the wisdom of Apkallus in its entirety. This role is a precise parallel to the Watchers of First Enoch, where you also find the story, who taught humanity forbidden knowledge by which they became wicked and depraved. So I just had to throw this in there, because then I'm looking around and I'm like, how the hell can this Egregore word be the Watchers? Is this in the Septuagint? And then if they're translating that, where are you getting it from? And I finally found that the Aramaic, the term for Watchers used in Daniel and other places, is Irid. And it just occurred to me that this word Inrod shows up all over in these higher degrees of masonry. And Irid is remarkably similar. If you just switch 2 letters, then you get Irid. So maybe really it is the Watchers who are in charge of this whole thing. And there is precedent for that, like that tarot card I showed you of the high priestess. It says Rota on the scroll she's holding. Or it says tarot. That's what it says, but it's actually what it's saying. There's the Rota square. You just have to switch a couple of the letters. These blinds are pretty common. I don't actually think this. I just think this is kind of, maybe, but this is kind of a funny idea that it's the same 4 letters for Watcher as it is for that you find used a lot in these higher degrees. But the point here is this tradition of recovering of ancient wisdom, which has to happen in the temple. The transmission of the imperishable great arcanum represented by the Hebrew letter Nun, which is also the symbol of the fish, as in fishing the ancient wisdom out of the floodwaters. So that's what Eliade says all this fish symbolism is about, even with Christianity, this is the knowledge that was drowned has to be like reawakened, like getting it out of the flood, fishing it out. Eliade described the fish and the fisherman symbols as connected with the revelation or the passage of a doctrine from the state of oblivion or eclipse to the state of total manifestation. So this is funny thought that there's a kind of knowledge out there that's just asleep. right, that no one is really accessing. But if you come into a certain temple and you're initiated in a certain way, suddenly this is like hitting the on button on the hard drive. Suddenly this operating system will be running in there. That's almost the idea about this, that they're talking about, this dormant knowledge that can be reactivated continuously within people. Elements of such recovery can be found in the Royal Arc Manor degree with the Rainbow Bridge connecting pre- and post-flood, or gods and mortals. Also the ancient accepted Scottish Rite 25th degree, Grand Noahide Patriarch, where the candidate is consecrated an Noahide Mason, and the finding of the tomb of the architect by the Tower of Babel and a pillar of white marble, and a continuation of the craft following the deluge. So the witch tradition uses this myth in particular as the basis for its system. That claim of the two-ball cane, why are they having pillars in there? Because their mythology it still has the Watcher knowledge on it. This is the lodge room in Sweden, the Grand Lodge, and I have not had the pleasure of visiting it yet, but I'm going this year, hopefully when I'm there. But a brother of mine who did go there said that in the pillars, you can see them near the J and B in the background. Then in one of them there's a little door, and you open it up and it's like hollow or something. And so there's a lot of even stories you can find about that. There's this one funny one about stolen Templar treasure that was hidden in the pillars. Maybe you've heard this one. But what he and I were talking about is like, something is in the pillars. You know, what I'm talking about is some kind of knowledge is hidden in the pillars. There's an opening to get inside of it. So I just think it's interesting that in Sweden they have these pillars that have this sort of little door so you can see that it's hollow. Okay, moving right along. I'm going to just keep moving more and more into the more esotericism. So here's a person who is talking about the pillars in terms of gender binary. And where this goes is the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, which probably a lot of you already know in relation to the pillars. But this emphasis on gender with the pillars is pretty interesting. So this person says, the purported use of pillars in temple rites survives as one of the archetypes from antiquity that parallel the proliferation of transgender priesthoods. Middle pillars are hermaphroditic and represents a sacred space between the pillars. The existence of the middle pillar is universally recognized by Kabbalists of virtually every tradition. However, when virtually applied to temples of various genres, the middle pillar is not physically represented. So this is a transgender person who is also an occultist who says that in their experience, being initiated had this kind of like shamanic experience where they had dreams that they realized they were sort of in between these two genders, and that this is sort of actualized in the pillars of going into the middle between the two genders into that middle space is somehow aiming for this synthesis, this occult synthesis. So digging more into that, you do really find these occultists in the 19th century talking about the two poles of the Tree of Life in sort of gendered terms. So this is, I'm going to read now from Helena Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophical Society. She's not the only one influencing all this stuff, but she's definitely the Theosophical Society is a big influence on a lot of where these ideas are coming from. So here's what she's saying about the two pillars. Does the Western Kabbalist, generally an opponent of the Eastern occultists, require a proof? Let him open Eliphas Levy's Histoire de la Magie and carefully examine his great symbolic Kabbalistic of the Zohar. So this other person, Eliphas Levy, is also where most of these traditions are getting, including her, are getting a lot of their ideas about the Kabbalah. He will find on the engraving given a white man standing erect and a black woman upside down, i.e. standing on her head with her legs passing under the extended arms of the male figure and protruding behind his shoulders, while their hands join at an angle on each side. Eliphas Levy makes of it God in nature, or God, light, mirrored intensely in nature and matter, darkness. Well, that's pretty clear, like earth and darkness is sort of like the feminine, right, the fertile part, and then this light has been typically described as this like solar masculine part. Kabbalistically and symbolically, he is right, but only so far as emblematic cosmogony goes. Nor has he invented the symbol any more than the Kabbalists have. The two figures in white and black stone have existed in the temples of Egypt from time immemorial, agreeably to tradition and historically, ever since the day of King Cambyses, who personally saw them. Therefore, the symbol must have been in existence nearly 25 years ago, saying the symbol of the two pillars must have been in existence, what she's saying, 2,500 years ago. This, at the very least, for the Persian sovereign, who was the son of Cyrus the Great, succeeded his father in the year 529 see, these figures were the two Kabiri, personifying the opposite poles. Kabiri is mystery tradition gods. Herodotus tells posterity that when Cambyses entered the temple of the Kabirim, he went into an inextinguishable fit of laughter on perceiving what he thought was a man erect and a woman standing on the top of her head before him. These were the poles, however, whose symbol was intended to commemorate the passing of the original North Pole of the East, the Earth, and the South Pole of Heaven, as perceived by Mackey. But they represent also the poles inverted in consequence of the great inclination of the axis, bringing each time as a result the displacement of the oceans, the submersion of the polar lands, and the consequent upheaval of the new continents in the equatorial regions, blah, blah, blah. These Kabirim were the deluge gods. So after all that, it's tied back to this knowledge of the flood. And so I looked this up. I was like, did Cambyses say this? He doesn't actually really say that. He laughs, that's all it says. But he doesn't say he saw this weird thing that she's describing of this upside down. I mean, maybe he did. Maybe she has a different source. But from the sources I found, I couldn't find exactly that. And this is the illustration she's referring to, which, I don't know, I've also seen sort of Kabbalistic renderings of this where it's just sort of showing the two aspects of God, the sort of appearance part and then the hidden part. And maybe that's what's being depicted here. It doesn't look exactly like she described, but I mean, it's going to be a blind, or it's, you know, it's an interesting way to interpret it. Because you find that idea of these two genders for the pillars turning up more and more Kabbalistically. Here's what scholar E. Waite said about these. The middle pillar is the tree of life, and perhaps the two pillars are together the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But it is all speculation and all is high convention. There is no evil when these are united with the central pillar, which is called the seventh day, the Sabbath, and the tent of peace. It is the peace in particular between the light of the right side and that which in another place is called the darkness of the left. This is interesting that I learned this, that this political spectrum we have about right and left, this comes apparently from the assembly in 1789 after the French Revolution, where all the people on the left sat on who wanted change and reform sat on the left of the president, and all of the people who wanted to be attached to the monarchy or the old ways to come back, which sat on the right. And the reason why the ones sat on the left is because they were suspicious. You know, they had sort of the left hand has been, is the darker, suspicious hand. They were suspicious about what's happening and wanted to do something different. The middle pillar draws the right and lefts together, the good and evil together, in which union evil dissolves as such, and the good obtains entirely under the name of benignity, which is that of the middle pillar. It is a question of transmutation. So here's probably one you find in Masonry a lot of a way, an esoteric-y, symbolic, whatever way to, you see people talking about these two pillars, comparing it to the tree of life. But this is really coming from like the Golden Dawn, coming from Theosophy, who seem to always, if you track this down, it always gets linked to this flood story, which I just think is interesting because we do have these pillars being linked to the flood story in the old charges. All right, I have a little bit more time here, so I'm just going to go through a couple more esoteric interpretations of the pillars. So here's a person that I studied, a German esotericist named Rudolf Steiner. He got a charter for his version of kind of quasi-masonry. At the same time, Aleister Crowley got his version, his charter for this kind of clandestine masonry. They both made different versions of the same thing. Steiner's thing is not around anymore, Crowley's is still around. But when he was doing his initiations, he also had the pillars present. And this is an image he did of the pillars. I'm just going to read you a little bit of what he said these pillars mean because it's pretty interesting. He called them the Weltansäulen, the world pillars in German, is what he said these are. Joachim can also be described as a pillar of birth, and Boaz as a pillar of death. In Berlin in 1916, here's what he said. Humankind descends into birth through Joachim, being reassured by Joachim. What is outside in the cosmos is now within you. You are now a microcosm. But that is what Joachim means, the divine in you which is spread out over the universe. Boaz, the other pillar, the entry into the spiritual world through death. What is summarized in the word Boaz signifies more or less what I formerly sought within myself, strength, I shall now find spread out over the whole universe in which I shall live. In our, I can't really go into this because I think there are non-Masons here, but the two words for the first 2 degrees were switched at a certain point, or so I've been told. So he's kind of following the original arrangement, so that when you were entering the temple, you bump up against one pillar, which he says is kind of like you entering into the macrocosm. And then after you get your third degree, and you pass by the second pillar, then you're sort of bringing the macrocosm out into your microcosm. It's really, if you think about it, it's the same thing that Eliade was talking about. That you enter into the temple, you enter this other kind of time, which creates the world into sort of a sacred universe in which you get to inhabit in the realm of myth. But he says a few more things about it I want to show you. Here's this the Theosophical Society of Stuttgart. He designed this room. He designed a lot of temples where they did rituals, and you can see here he has the two pillars there, and he's colored them red and blue. And I've heard people talking about this being the red and blue pillar, right? And that even the Matrix is somehow drawing on this tradition of the two pills in the esoteric writings of hitting both of them. That the pillars mean something like one than the other. And the red and blue is Steiner's version of coloring them. So here's a couple other illustrations that followers of his have done. And they're taking this from Revelation 10:1. And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. Steiner claims the principle of these two pillars is also based on the fourth seal of the Revelation of John, but here in the form of an angel with feet like pillars of fire. The left column Yakin stands on the sea, which is symbolized by the moving astral world, and the right Boaz rests on solid land. And if you look at his drawing of it, you can kind of see that. It makes sense. It's basically like the water is fluid and spiritual, but the earth is the material, the world of the death. And then you have this rainbow the rainbow bridge connecting them. Another way he talked about these, though, is representing the two trees in the garden. And we heard that a little bit already in these Kabbalistic interpretations of it. But he takes this a step further, which I think, this is why I'm interested in Steiner, because he always goes in these really strange directions from your kind of regular occult interpretation of these things. He adds something to it, which I always find really interesting. So what he says, or why he picks them red and blue, is because the mystery of these two pillars is actually about the two different kinds of blood in the body. As though there were red and blue blood, which there sort of isn't materialistically speaking, but he says this is kind of, one appears blue, but he's kind of interpreting these as spiritual qualities that two different kinds of blood have. So I'm going to read to you what he says here. This diagram from Steiner's lecture series on occult physiology given in Prague in 1911 shows two circulation loops from the heart. The atria are the upper chambers of the heart, and the ventricles the lower chambers. The heart receives the blue blood, depleted of oxygen nutrients, in the right atrium, and the lungs takes blood from the right ventricle and enriches it with oxygen nutrients and pours the oxygen-rich blood into the left atrium. From there it flows into the left ventricle and out in two streams to the brain and the rest of the body. Understanding this idea of the minor and major circulation of the blood is essential for grasping Steiner's occult physiology. So he's connecting this up to the body, the two pillars. Steiner is also thinking of the difference between venous blood and arterial blood. But what he's drawing on here is he's not totally ignorant. He's drawing on it, somewhat outdated science now, but he's also specifically looking back to the alchemists, such as Paracelsus. Another one he reads a lot is Jean-Baptiste van Helmont. It's not Mercury van Helmont. But he's actually looking back to these discredited alchemist healers to try to bring their ideas. He's interested, he thinks those ideas are more, this is how he gets it, it's like esoteric medicine, basically, is what he would probably say it is. Okay, I'm almost done here. Here's another quote about this that he says about the red and the blue pillar, related to the blood. In the two pillars, the red one is the expression of the red blood, the I am, the tree of life. The blue blood is the expression of death, the tree of knowledge. There will be a time in the future when the human being will be able, by his own higher consciousness, to change the blue blood into red. You thus have two trees within you, the tree of the red blood and the tree of the blue blood. Man, as the bearer of an ego, cannot exist without these two trees. He had to take in the blood in order to have an ego, and that is how our modern knowledge arises. But death was connected with this development, where you constantly transform the red blood into blue blood filled with carbonic acid. The occult teacher of the Old Testament therefore said, "Look upon your own being. You have within you the red tree of blood. Without this tree, you would never have become a cognitive human being, thinking being. You have eaten of the tree of knowledge, but this gave you at the same time the possibility to give life. That which was once a tree of life became a death-bringing tree. The blue blood tree within us, therefore, is the tree of death." This is the present state of things, but the initiate sees a future state when the human being shall have the plant nature within him. With the heart organ shall transform the blue blood into red blood in a direct way within the human being. Then the tree of death shall have become the tree of life, and man shall have become an immortal being. That is like the most German way of basically saying, rebuilding the divine temple within you. He has a lot of other ideas in there, but if you distill that, like, what is he saying? It's an idea that you're probably familiar with, these higher degrees, is that humankind is in a fallen state, and that through these initiation rituals, you can return to the prelapsarian state before the fall, the kind of immortal divine state, right? That's basically what he's saying here, but he's tying in with the pillars and these two different kinds of blood, which I think is pretty interesting. My last two examples, which is not really much I know too much about, but I just wanted to show you where the pillars show up, like in the Gnostic Mass of the OTO, for instance. Not the OTO, the EGC. EGC and the OTO are different. But in their Gnostic Mass, they use they've changed them to black and red, and the pillars show up there. And they basically have a Kabbalistic significance, which is this kind of these gender polarities that I was talking about earlier. And then they write on them agape and thelema, of course. The Golden Dawn also makes use of the two pillars. They have them black and white, but they've etched all these Egyptian things from the Book of the Dead onto them. And they basically have a Kabbalistic significance as well. But during their degrees, they'll sort of move them around to like different places on where the Tree of Life would be. And even, Wiccans don't necessarily have temples, I guess, but they have this one. And even in this Wiccan church in England, they have, you see the black and white pillars being used in their ceremony. And I know what they're thinking about. They're thinking about watcher knowledge when they represent pillars like that. So that's basically my rambling. I wanted to just announce that I have this book coming out that I edited with Brother Angel Millar. It's coming out in May, and it's filled with a bunch of good essays on the topic of initiation that you might find interesting. Brother Adam Kendall has a great essay in there. This comes out in May, so definitely look out for that. It's by Masonic, so you can find it on their website. Okay, thank you.